Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. So I'm talking from very far away here in São Paulo, Brazil, and there's a huge time zone difference. So I feel like I'm talking to the teachers in the future. Yeah. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm here to share with you my classroom experience, and we take a look at it before the pandemic and a little bit, of course, during the pandemic and the difficulties to overcome. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll try to keep up with it. Good morning then, okay? For you, it's probably about evening. That's so interesting. Very well.
About 5:30, actually.
Okay, almost there. That's lovely. So I invite you for the following minutes to join me in this perspective of our theme in the symposium, which is Flexible Futures. And I decided to call my talk Feasible Tech Resources. And feasible is going to be the real keyword here, because it is very interesting to look at the possibilities and the dreams, but what actually works needs to be feasible in the classroom settings, and also in the case of English language teaching or English as a foreign language, to have a clear communicative purpose. So I invite you to take a look at the future. These pictures represent what people usually envision when we consider the future setting scenarios. But all over the world, and I'm talking about my context here, having my context in mind in São Paulo, which is a big city, but there are also major difficulties, and there's still the digital divide, which happens everywhere else in the world. And also, even if you are in a setting that has lots of resources, it doesn't mean that glitches won't happen. So this is what we usually look at when we think of the future, probably because of the influence of some series. For instance, this is so this would be one possible influence, just looking back at the cartoon from a long time ago. Well, coming to more current scenarios.
Yes, we can totally change the world. We can do this. And it's going to be amazing.
With this app, we would know what the dog is trying to tell us.
Rent your own space pod.
What if your data was stored in your houseplant?
As a concept, it's absolutely crazy. The thing is, it's possible.
Very well. So we look into the future sometimes through the lenses of media and science. But I would like to invite you
yes, we can totally change the world.
Into a scenario, but considering what actually happens. So when we are teaching, there are challenges of all sorts. In some contexts, adversities, also disadvantages. And I'm starting off with this very real concept for most classrooms in the world, because if it works in those scenarios, it's certainly going to work in more privileged ones. There is a quote by Michelle Obama from some time ago, and when she tweeted that, what caught my attention was the last part. First, she starts by saying, viewing challenges, not viewing challenges as a disadvantage. Instead, it's important for you to understand that your experience facing and overcoming adversity is actually one of your biggest advantages. And this is precisely what caught my attention. When we use technology in class, especially in the very beginning some years ago, we used to think that things would have to be perfect. And anything that went different from planned was considered a failure. Anything that was not according to the dream was also considered, okay, so that's not for me. It is not possible. So I have chosen over the years to face things as challenge and to work with my students collaboratively so that whatever tech decision or tool we use has a communicative purpose and a learning curve for both us teachers and the students. Then still keeping this vision, looking to the future. So what is the future? If we travel back 10 years ago, precisely 2012, and that coincides with the date when I started using technology in class and blogging as a way of registering the path and everything I was learning so that I could share with my learners, with my colleagues. So what was envisioned back then? So let's watch a short video here. This is just, we can take this glimpse with what was projected back then. Question, 10 years ahead, so we are the future of this prediction. And how much do our classrooms actually resemble that? So I invite you to actually take a look at the actual context and what was and what is feasible. So this is my class back in 2012. So obviously we didn't have all those transparent and amazing tablets, but yeah, there was my tablet, my very first tablet, and yes, QR codes. Back then, I don't know if you can recall it, there was no Wi-Fi available, at least from where I was teaching, in the context I was teaching here in São Paulo, and I believe pretty much everywhere. So I used the function, the text feature of the QR codes instead of distributing flashcards or cards so that they could interact and exchange ideas and keep some things from what we had studied in class. So this is one of the feasible things. This is another photo. It's still my class there. And this is how students felt. We can see, I believe it's possible to see they were excited about it. And I did that with the adult learners and teenagers, obviously. Try to remember the mobile phone model you had back then and how much internet was possibly not available. A little bit more of the context back then. So this is what was feasible. Simple devices and trying to overcome the lack of connectivity, but at the same time, saving resources instead of printing, keeping up with things, and also interacting. Not to mention that this was a very important thing because back then, I had my first blind student having classes in a group of sighted students. So that was a precious resource and very simple one. So the point I'm making here is that when we envision the future, there is a lot of sci-fi and projections, but it's important to see what can actually be done. How can I adjust this to my current reality? Because when we try that, it's also inclusive of all sorts of differences. A little bit further, in 2015, about a year after I had started with the Google Innovator program, I still remember the feeling when I watched this video for the first time. And I'm going to show very quickly, the videos are going to be really, really quick, so we just can have an idea. And let's watch. I just would like to check if I'm sharing the sound properly as it is. I'm trying to catch up with the chat, but you know, I'll be doing that later. But please comment. Later on, I'll be sharing a link with all the videos I mentioned and some other important recommended readings. So let's take a look at this first idea of VR for classroom usage.
All right, so let's do our objective and we'll talk about the lesson for today.
We're gonna take a field trip to Verona, Italy to see the place where Romeo and Juliet lived.
I'm going to take you on this field trip under the water. Okay, you guys ready? Pick up your devices.
And look in your cardboard.
What is that?
I see a shark.
It allowed us to go somewhere we wouldn't normally be able to go.
Are we in China?
This is the Great Wall of China.
We got to see the place itself, so we could actually understand what she was talking about.
How long would it?
I clearly remember one scene that I was really impressed by.
I'm going to
Verona, Italy to see
That I was dreaming of having
Verona, Italy.
this equipment in my class, and I said, okay, reality check. So back then, I did not have this possibility. We were looking into the future, and what about one device per student? But I also wanted my learners to have this experience somehow. And that's what I mean when I use this word feasible throughout this talk here. The thing is, how can we make this possible for our classroom settings?
All right, so let's.
This is what I had. Actually, I only had one Google Cardboard box. And back then, of course, before the COVID. And we had to work one student at a time. And I think after 2 years, I was able to have 2 cardboard settings. And it was not possible having groups of around 20 students. So the concept of rotation station was very useful, even though I had not heard of that before, which is basically preparing activities so that we can have this possibility of everyone taking a tour. But it's not the tour per se. It is the communicative purpose that we have in mind as a teacher, and also living really far away from some English-speaking countries. It's also about dreaming. So why are our learners studying English? Why are students, our adult learners, teenagers? So what is the dream behind that? English is not only a subject in our case, for the sense of, oh, okay, I'm studying this for school because I need a grade. Our context is even more challenging than that. This is another actual context. It was a group of adult learners elementary learners learning how to describe places using there is, there are. As I play this, these are some footage from my class, and there's a lot of background noise, but I believe you can understand how the activity went. Okay.
There is museu, there is a school. Oh no.
So, of course, the task was simple, and they were visiting, I remember it was London and another city, and they had to contrast and compare. And these are the young learners, rotation stations with activities, because everybody wants to be using the cardboard at the same time. So basically, it's about animals. They were visiting the forest, and they had to say the animals. And of course, they are young learners. One person in the comments shared that the future seems a lot more accurate in the videos, and this is one of the points. Sometimes I have the feeling that when we watch such videos, it's kind of a turn off in a sense. But actually, it's important to try to balance and find ways, creative ways around things, so our learners can experience things too. Okay, those GIFs, what are they illustrating? Yeah, so this GIF illustrates one of the most current possibilities for technology, which is the metaverse. And of course, the metaverse, as we know it right now, in this future we are living in comparison to what we have lived before, is still not ready. But we've been studying and taking a look not only at the possibilities, but at the drawbacks, at things we have to be careful about. But of course, looking at the possibilities is great too. The two GIFs I'm using here illustrate the possibility of immersive learning, more intense than through virtual reality. And somehow, the way I see it, virtual reality is a portal to the metaverse. Again, in our context of English language teaching, we need to look at it not as entertainment or a distraction, but how that can be integrated, and there is a gain for our students, a linguistic gain. Well, talking about the future, I remember this from some movies, the concept of a time capsule. Like we stock things from the past so we can see them in the future, or maybe the other way around. So what I invite you here for who recalls this scene here and the movie? So I'm looking at the chat. Do you recall the name of this movie, Michael J. Fox? This is from a very long time ago. Thank you. It is Back to the Future, is a classic. So if we are around the same age range, you can recall the feeling. So this was the almanac up to the year 2000. Very well. As I was preparing this session, giving the final touch to this presentation, I came across something really interesting, which is a magazine cover from the future. I mean, from a future not really far away. So this is the cover of Time magazine that's going to be launched on the 18th of August this year. So it's kind of a future. And guess what? It will be about the metaverse. And this was so interesting because the designer kind of shared this sneak peek to this magazine cover, and it got everybody talking about it. The hoverboard, yes, I'm still looking for that too. Very well. Okay, a very interesting point here in the chart. It's what happens because of the board, because of the resource being used. So the metaverse brings lots of perspectives, but how much of that is fantasy? How much of that is going to be feasible? How will that be integrated into learning, regardless of the subjects? Is there going to be an inclusion through the metaverse? And there are so many other questions to consider. Well, there is tremendous transformative potential in the digital technologies, as we know, and we are living the most current of times. But we have not yet figured out how to deliver on these many promises. So there are lots of promises, and I invite us teachers not to be scared or intimidated or insecure when words such as artificial intelligence or the metaverse or the virtual reality of integrating different platforms. Because sometimes we feel like, okay, you know, the imposter syndrome kicking in. So I believe it's important to understand what is feasible, to be curious and say, okay, let's see, even if I don't start using that right now, what is the potential? And of course, the lockdown learnings. And if anything has brought us together over these last years, it is this feeling of vulnerability. And somehow, when there is a new integration, we teachers feel kind of vulnerable in a sense of, I'm not really in control, as if one can ever be in control of things. But I think you understand the sense, because we plan a delivery, we have learning intentions and purposes and goals throughout our classes. There is this uncertainty as well. I will recommend, this is very interesting reading. It's available in the UNESCO website, and I'll be sharing very, very shortly with you a link in the comments with everything I have mentioned and some extra links of the things I was not able to dig into and tell you a lot more about. Obviously, the past 2 years, we have experienced, and I'm about to conclude here, what I call the digital growth leap, which is pretty similar to this. That's Rebecca Andrade from Brazil, and just the pun and the medal and how things are surprising and amazing to look at. And if we consider teachers, our students, their parents, we all have experienced this learning growth on how to deal with tech resources, to teach and to study remotely, and even with these multiple challenges that have surfaced. So this leap right, is important to be considered. Well, this is a quote that has been around, and this quote, what I take from it, which I believe is important for us, is that we need to adjust the sails. We need to adjust how things are moving along and take up challenges that can help us all grow and even beyond the teaching settings. And that's why change is the only constant. It's important to learn from the past, to look at the experience of the past, but to understand that it's ever changing and it's ever challenging us. So thank you so much for your attention and for your participation. And of course, I'll be taking a look at the chart right now. I'd like to know if there are questions, anything you'd like to ask.
Thank you for that, Raquel. A very thoughtful presentation of our future. There seems to be one small question in the question section. Perhaps you wouldn't mind answering that now, but thank you for your presentation and for waking up early for us.
Oh,